Hi there, Randy Green here, and as promised, I said I was going to do the original transmission, but after a little bit of a debate, it's better that it's put within a context, because just getting the sciences raw as they are without having it in some sort of context you can relate to is probably shooting above the target. So let us do it within a context, and why I keep saying you should do my teachings. So I'll explain a little bit about my teachings, why I see them as important, and then I'll explain a little bit about some of the tasks that you will have, those of you who are in the future timelines and are part of the fifth cycle, some of the challenges that we're going to get, and why I, in that context, see my teachings as foundational to have it as a kind of an anchor point in the work that you are to do, because there's a huge difference between my teachings and what I'm here saying. And that's because we are in this weird reality that has its original configuration that we used to belong to, and then what it has turned into. So our work in this awakening process is to figure out how to bridge the past, the present, and the future. But we can only technically work in two layers, as in kind of present past or present future, which is why, as I talked about in the previous video, for the ones that are from the future, they are configured in that way to completely avoid the past. And there's a reason for that, and that is due to the original construction of our solar system. And that goes with the Pillar Project. And the Pillar Project is the one I am explaining what that is. That is the constructional foundation of our reality. That's the advanced world you originally, not you from the future, but the genetics you have stem from. So you need to know this to understand this is what you need to reconnect to, and then you are to lift and transform that into the future features from the worlds that you are coming from. And why is that important? First and foremost, because the solar system used to be part of a collection of solar systems that worked within a network that were part of the ancient ones. Secondly, because the projects we were doing here were meant as an attempt to upgrade and catch up and catch all that had not followed the original progression dynamics of the true human worlds and were to go into the fifth cycle, but constantly had issues from the previous universal structure that they could not get rid of. And that all ties back to some of what we would call the genetic malfunction in the original consciousness units that were transferred from the previous universal structure and the 10 lineages there and brought into this universal structure and became part of a collective of the D13 collective that then began creating what we call that group that is called the humanoids. And they are technically, genetically speaking, having a variation of the original true human genome, which then makes them slightly different. And over the course of time, including the time event, was turned into a further malfunction that led to what's called ill-mindedness. And that is what leads to service to self. So that's the short version of the historical background. I give more of this in the whole perception logs if you want the full picture of how I remember history. So that's there. So I don't want to go further into that here because this is not the goal of this video. This video, I want to talk about relative reality. And relative reality comes in play when we are walking around or living inside this reality that is under different zodiacal forces, which we know, you know this as astrology, that's the very distorted version of it. The original version was the original 12 houses, but in the invasion and in the hijacking, these 12 houses were taken over by different races, which then work through our reality each month. So each month, we have, including over the course of the weeks, we have different factions coming in. And unless you have your anchor point and know exactly, oh, this is why, then you will be a leaf in the wind. You will follow the frequency alterations. You will follow the emotional electrochemical alterations that they put in play whenever they're entering. Some of them are only here for 3 or 4 days, but you will learn to detect the signs. For instance, when they need to link up the artificial fourth dimension and do their monthly harvesting, we are having an enormous amount of chemtrailing going on the week before, or sometimes shorter period of time, all depending on how quickly they need to go in and how quickly they need to leave. And that links us up to the artificial four, where they holographically can create semi-artificial realities that are only there for that purpose. these 4 days linking up to our world, creating a bridge from where they use different forms of alien technologies that will then pull in their prospects that have that genetic configuration from where they can pull in our energy system. We have our body in our beds, but they are taking our entire energy system and shift it into a clone version in the artificial fourth, which is then linked up to artificial technology, which is then being used to create different forms of genetics that are run on what we call artificial timelines that are run by some pretty complex consciousness holographic unit programs. You could call it entering into a virtual reality, if you like. That's the artificial fourth. That's one of the key signatures of that. Once they are done, they just leave the clones behind. They leave the facilities behind. They've created their holographic. They will eventually kind of what we could call decompose, because there's no fueling of it. They have the specific technology of a sphere, a cube, and then they create the artificial reality. So they're using the original spherical technology that's part of our original construction, but they insert cubes from the humanoid system from where they can create an artificial 6th dimension and 5th dimension, that's the cube, and then the artificial 4th where we have the clone and that technology from where they can harness and harvest whatever they need of genetic components by running us through different types of artificial programs that are in the 4th dimension. And then they just leave the rest, and that's part of some of the work I'm constantly doing when I'm taking that down, because then we go in, if you are capable of doing the holographic projection into the artificial 4th, you will see what is left of what they have used your energy system to create. And of course, you need to create that what they have used your energy system for. Otherwise, you will kind of have an anchor point in that clone or whatever's there, which will then control your energies until next month, which will make it easier for them to latch on to you. So that's the horrible side of it. So how do you keep yourself sane in all of that insanity, right? How do you keep your anchor point? And that's where when we begin, when you do the whole basics or the basic concepts, you will see I begin with giving you 4 courses, the whole advanced class 1 to 4 for free, where you have the text material, and there you have the videos I made explaining that text material in 2017, where the energies were a little bit higher. So they're a good starting point. So what are you studying when you go in and do the whole completed course 1 and 2? What are you doing there? Are you, technically, there are 8 videos and there are text material, and it explains the time matrix, and it explains the integration of time into our perception and inner work. It explains why it is important to understand the time matrix, and it gives the first 9 principles in the overview and extended compared to what I talked about in the whole advanced classes. And you have the even further higher level in the mastery of choice and the mastery of life that I have put out for free on this whole High Awareness Lifestyle channel. Then you have the rules of engagement and overview and extended, the individual mastery of our reality, and the group awareness and true team building, as it were, of the 4th cycle. These teachings are oriented towards the 4th cycle. So how can we use that? Even though we are from the future and we are on the 5th cycle and we are trying to do that, but our bodies are still in the 4th cycle. So that's the challenge that we have as well. Portions of us are lodged into the 4th cycle, and portions of us, the inner human is in the 5th, the outer human is in the 4th. So we need to master the physical form and the lower fields, that is the emotional field and the mental field. And to be able to do that, we need some kind of science, some kind of energy reconstruction, ideologies and ideas and frames of references from where we can build a new type of emotional field and a new type of mental field, which will then assist us in integrating the higher order energy system wherever and whatever it is, if it's from the future or if it's from the past or if from the humanoid races or the true human races, doesn't really matter at this point in time. So what we're dealing with here is that the HAL Academy courses are your anchor point of this is the reality as it used to look. So this is the good stuff, right? That's where you get happy and think, oh, everything is possible. That's where you learn this is how it used to be. So you kind of have that in your heart field, that understanding that this used to be a good place. But at the same time, you're also struggling all of the other races that are here now due to the invasion and the hijacking. And that's also the reality. And how do you get through times of great distress, so to speak? You get through if you have a core belief that assists you in keeping yourself balanced and sane. And that's how you are to use my teachings. They are the balance point you need to remind you of. This is how it used to be. We can't return to that, but this is how it used to be. So this is where I built my foundation. This is where I have my core essence in that original understanding of being part of an enormously advanced civilizations that work for the highest good of the many, that work within laws of principles and rules of engagement, where we were all treating each other in the right manner. But not in some kind of sappy emotional way that goes with compassion and all these kind of things, because that's not who we were. We were here because we were assigned some pretty difficult type of genetic reengineering that goes with the understanding of the original malfunctioning in the D13 collective, as well as rippling into the extreme inversion that happened in the timeline event. So we're here to transform energy. We're here to transform genetics. And our reality field was reconstructed to be able to do that after the timeline event, because the first and second and third cycle after the timeline event were a complete horror show. And they go from past Earth into future Earth. That's where the Trinity configuration will let, as a foundation of the solar system after the timeline event, it recreated itself. The original pillars of the original worlds that were part of this complex structure that were here to scientifically alter the original genetic composition of the humanoid genetics. And the humanoids that were here were on board that idea, which is why we have the humanoid alterations in the planetary networks to begin with, which is why we allowed the different humanoid races to seed in either ancient crafts or seed in their technologies, such as the fifth dimensional cube technology, to create their artificial grids inside this reality that were a fourth, fifth, and sixth dimensional system that were lodged up to the true human worlds to begin with. And we deliberately pushed it further back into the time using some pretty advanced technologies where, as an attempt to push it further back in time, actually integrate some of the third cycle energies before the timeline event, because that's where the malfunction of the D13 collective went wrong. So that was experimented with, and that led to the timeline event, and that led to the disastrous side effects that eventually led to the blow up of Tara and all of these kind of things. So that's even going even further back in history. So that's our anchor point to understand that foundational concept of the ability to work with genetics and consciousness to alter these into their original form and original purpose. So since things have changed, and with the hijacking and what's going on here and their alteration of the original developmental programs, that is some of the things I begin to explain in the whole completed science courses, where I then talk about the time matrix and the inner and outer work, laying the foundational ideas that you kind of need to have. It's also done in the whole advanced class 1 to 4, and many will say, well, that's all I need. That's just the basics, people. That's just giving you the foundational frames of references. And then in the course material, I work from there, I build into more and more complexity. I build into more and more details where we kind of cut a focused line of information into each and one of these understandings, as in kind of what is the time matrix. And that's the 2017 version of it. And I am glad I did it back then, because there I was just tapping into it as a beginning point. So that is where you can say that's the beginning level of it. Whereas if I am to explain it today, I would say, okay, the time matrix. Yeah, we kind of have 4 different versions of it. That all depends on which race do you want me to explain the time matrix about. Okay, you want to talk about the parallel universal matrix that were part of the regress races and what they have done and what they have turned into and what are their configurations and how have they used these genetics. But what's the point of knowing that time matrix unless you're actually connected to it? You see where I'm going. So I have become way too knowledgeable, whereas that's why I keep the basic concept courses, because there I am working with where many of you will begin. So that's a good starting point where you get invited to the party and then you learn what the party is all about. So that's why I have kept them there and how I work further into it. But relative reality in the time matrices, as we talked about, the artificial fourth is technically a time matrix. The artificial fifth is a time matrix because it links up to parallel worlds from where they artificially can work inside our system. So it's not just the universal structure that's a time matrix. That's also a time matrix. But it depends on how you're using these time matrices. Are you using them within the frequency spectrum? Then it's a mathematical algorithm that runs with scalar fields, as the Contextual taught us. But if you go with the original time matrices that are also built upon code systems or holographic units, these are no longer using mathematical algorithms. They are not using what we call binary code system or tree vector code systems. They are expanding into complex code systems that goes up to the 6th level of information, complex information system. And they have different dynamics. This is what I talk about in the whole transition science classes, where I then begin to teach you how to work with the original 6-layer complexity, psychological, psychic, energetic processes of how to deal with information. Because that's what we need now. We need the information. You have been working on the emotional level for a very long time. Now you need the information. You need to get your higher order thinking processes into the game, so that you can truly transform your emotional field and truly transform the biocodes of your physical field. So this is, if you don't have the true sciences, the changing of these codes will only be in alignment with what you know. That's some of the human DNA. That's why our sciences are being kept stuck within a specific spectrum of information, because they want that energy to be there to keep our human DNA within that spectrum. So to break through into the higher order sciences and the higher order functionality of your energy systems, you need the sciences to do so. And that is the journey I take you on when I go through the course material. You're not just getting information. You are getting understanding. You are getting knowledge. You are getting energy from where you can begin to build that energy system you need to seed in the future. Because as I said and began with, the first 3 cycles after the timeline event altered the original Trinity configuration. And it did so because pillar 1-7 goes from the first dimension, so to speak, from Mercury until the 7th dimension, and that's the Arcturian system. The 2-8 pillar goes from Venus and up to the Orion system. And the, what we call the 3rd pillar goes from our planet and to the Andromeda system. That's the sciences we were working with on these 3 cycles that at that point in time did not have what we understand as planets. That came after the timeline event. So, and then we had the same configuration within our reality field, but our planet did not look at it as it does now at that point in time after the timeline event. We're still having a reality field where the different workstations, which have now become planets, were working in that crossband between the different dimensional settings that led to these different humanoid systems. But as these humanoid systems fell, they began to affect the Trinity system of our solar system, which meant that they began invading different levels of our solar system and taking out the workstations. Top meaning of this is that we have future Earth in the 7th, 8th, and 9th dimension of the original configuration, but they are struggling with the Arcturians and the Orions, as well as what is left of the Andromeda system, because they are linked up to that due to their original construction. So the future Earth now is technically what's left of the original Pillar project in 7th, 8th, and 9th dimension. We are what's left of the original Pillar project in the 4th, 5th, and 6th dimension. And past Earth is what's left of the original Pillar project in the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd dimension, which makes no sense, because what is the 1st dimension, right? You can say, well, that's the quantum field. The 2nd dimension is kind of the atomic level, and the 3rd dimension is the molecular level, if you want. So these are the sciences that focus on this and not the reality fields themselves. So the dimensions are to be understood, the knowledge and the sciences we're working with on these different aspects of our reality field. So in our reality field, we're working with the aspects of the 4th and the 5th and the 6th dimension that goes with the 4th, 5th, and 6th cycle, that goes with the different sciences that are connected to these cycles and what we're supposed to know at this point in time. But at the same time, we also the original configuration of the 3-9, which goes with the sciences of the holographic units and how to use the holographic units to create reality fields. Whereas the 4th cycle is connected to the understanding of governance of reality fields, and the 5th cycle is focused on the developmental programs that goes with the foundation of reality fields. So that's the sciences that we need to know we are to follow into the cycles of our original consciousness units. So with that little bit of context for why you need to go through the whole completed courses and do that, that's the foundation where some foundational concepts are explained, and to keep you anchored into that understanding from where you then get the foundation you can continue to build with. Because to truly be able to transform your energy system, you need to nail reality as well, and what this reality is and how it originally were and what's the historical context of it, so that when you do encounter certain things in your inner work, you will understand that that moment you connect to that inner level of your timelines and your heart field, you will be drawn to that reality section with that timeline, and that will be your relative reality on the inner level. So when you're working on that timeline, your inner perception will be all about that. And in the beginning, you think, oh, that's because it's like that in the world. But you will then discover it's because as you enter into these timelines, it will unfold into your perception field. And then everything you will see on the inner levels in your meditation and mindful processes will be what is on your timelines. And that is presented only for you so you can transform and clear it out and let go of these timelines and what you have got of infusions or imprints connected to it on that timeline. Whereas when we talk about the relative reality where the alien technologies are altering our physical reality so they can do the pull in, is also relative reality, but that's on the holographic collective level. So that's also a kind of discernment between you and the collective, you and others, as well as you and who you are. So there are these many different levels of who and what you are. And these were also some of the things we learned in the different cycles. And the relative reality goes with that enormously advanced construction we're part of. So while you're working with specific type of energy and consciousness, you are on specific timelines that leads you to that type of energy and these kind of features and experiences that you need to develop the code systems that are to build your advanced energy system. So that is how that works. So that's the basic level that is being given in the relative reality. But since they're made in 2017, much more simple and therefore a good place to begin this journey to develop your full mental understanding and the higher order sciences that you will need as an anchor point as you go through the different inner and outer experiences in your activation process.